Hey guys, Laura here with STP, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Emily Jones, who's one of the tutors on our team. Emily just took the May SAT this morning, and she is here to fill us in on what it was all about. I have tons of questions for her, so stick around till the end of this video and you can get all the juicy details. All right guys, before we get going on this video, make sure you like and subscribe to my channel if you find this video helpful. And now let's just have Emily introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her before we get into things.
Hi guys, I'm Emily. I've been working with the company for a little less than a year now, and I recently committed to Johns Hopkins University. I'm planning on majoring in econ as a math lover. So on my last SAT, I got a 1500, I got a 770 on the math section and a 730 on the English.
Yeah, she's a rock star. So if you're looking for a tutor, Emily's definitely like a great person to work with. Obviously, I hired her, so I'm just so excited to have you. Thanks for coming today. Let's get into the May test, shall we? So here was the first thing I wanted to ask you. You took the paper test last year. Mm-hmm. How did you feel about the digital test that you took today versus the paper one?
Well, the first thing I noticed was that I don't even think I needed that break today. It was a 10-minute break in between the English and the math, but during the paper test, I felt like I was dying. Like I felt I was slaving away, reading for hours and hours and hours on end, but this one felt so fast. Every time I looked at the clock, I hid the clock for the most part, but when I opened the clock back up, I was like, oh, I have so much time. I can relax almost. I felt like on the paper test, I was roshing through, and I had a lot of trouble building up stamina trying to get through the English on time, and this time I've never experienced a test where I've had extra time on every single section. It was honestly a breeze.
Yes, and I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah. I think that after the March test, the digital SAT's gotten kind of a bad rap. Everybody's saying, oh, it was so hard, but it's so good to hear your experience already, and how it's a lot faster, because I also like that about it. I feel like every time I was on the fourth section of the math on the paper test, I just wanted to be done. Yeah. You know what I mean? So
and that's what I felt like. I felt refreshed. I could just get into the math, and I wasn't drained from the English because it felt so short, it was weird.
Yeah,
honestly.
Yeah. All right. So my next question is, did you talk to any students during or after the test, or even just from your own perspective, how did the difficulty level feel of this May test?
I felt like for the Module 2 English, everyone had kind of a different opinion. I personally thought it was slightly more challenging, but not by a long shot. But some people, maybe they're less English oriented, thought it was a lot harder. I heard people walking in the bathroom oh my God, I don't know what just happened on Module 2 English. But I felt like it was a reasonable jump from the first one. The first one felt maybe a little too easy, and then the second one was okay, I need to think a little bit harder. And then for the math, weirdly, Module 2 for math, the beginning felt exactly like the first one. But then it in the middle, there was this chunk where I was I don't know, this is kind of hard. And then the last few questions went back to being a little easier, which was odd. Normally I feel like it picks up easy, okay, hard, but this one had a weird chunk where it was a little harder, and then the beginning and end problems were reasonably placed with the first module.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
So if you had to label this overall as an easy, fair, or hard test, what would you say?
I would say fair. I would say Module 1 English was easy. I will say that everything else was fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the most challenging thing to you about the test today?
Well, I was not expecting that many systems of equations problems. So just seeing problem after problem after problem being systems of equations was a little bit made me a little nervous, because it has been a while since I've done that in school. And then on the English, some of the passages that were which answer choice most logically completes the paragraph were a little tricky, because I felt like it was very easy to get lost in your own interpretation of what you just read. So that was hard for me because it was harder to like stay focused, and like trying to make all the answer choices work was definitely a problem for me. But
yeah, and like I've noticed that like working with students, that in your own interpretation, that can happen a lot, where like I'll work with a student and they'll like try to connect the dots themselves, and then they'll end up picking a trap answer. And it's like, okay, there's got to be some word, some synonym, something in there that gives you textual evidence to pick the answer. So that's the biggest thing I would say to you guys out there on the English is make sure you have textual evidence, because if you can't find something in the passage to back up your answer, then it's probably not right. And then what were you saying with the math? I totally lost it. Oh, systems.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of coordinate, or systems of equations.
Yeah, which is like, you know, if you're watching this video and you're a student and you haven't touched Desmos yet, like that's your biggest mistake. So, because all those systems questions, it's so much easier to do when you put it in Desmos. And like Emily and I were talking before the video, and anytime you see a constant like A, B, or C, and they say, you know, it's in this equation, you can type it into Desmos and use a slider for the constant and move the graph around. So it's really, really nice. I think it's better than the TI-84, because on the TI-84, you can't use a slider, you can't move the graph at all and manipulate it. So that's so interesting. Yeah.
Also, I went into the math expecting, just as someone who's very used to the paper test, expecting central angles, pictures of circles and triangles, and I got a volume as like a prism, and I got like 2 circle equations, but nothing about central angles, nothing really with angles unless it was trig. So I was expecting different, but it wasn't necessarily harder. I was just like a little bit like, oh, this is new.
Yeah, and like, you know, just to piggyback off of that, I feel like initially when the digital SAT came out, I was thinking, oh, all the math concepts are pretty much the same as the paper. And as this test has like continued on, I've noticed that there has been an evolution in the things that are tested. And, you know, just to give you guys a little background on Emily, she's been doing a lot of subject tutoring lately, not as much SATs, which is why I had her go in and take it today, because we're getting back into SAT mode together. But it's interesting to hear that you see the differences too, because there's definitely like slight differences with what they're doing. Yeah. What do you think was the toughest part on the English sections?
I think that the toughest part on the English section was these kind of weird narrative stories, and I couldn't tell if they were fiction or if they were nonfiction, that didn't have a blurb, no intro, just like a thing, and it was very easy to, I don't know, I kind of had to read everything with a voice. Like there was this one that was talking about space, but it was a little like action-y. It wasn't very like scientific, so I had to kind of put a voice to the passage, or else I would be like, I don't know what I'm reading. I don't know what the tone of the passage is, because then the which logically finishes this paragraph would be very much like interpreting what you just read. But if you didn't have a tone to it, there's nothing scientific to be like, okay, this is parallel to this answer. It was like, I don't know, it felt like a guessing game almost. It was weird.
I know, I'm finding like, you know, going off of that too, I'm finding that like with transition questions, I used to teach it where, and you know, because we work together, like I would say, oh, look for a positive sentence and then a negative sentence, and you'll know it's a contrast. But these science passages, tone is out the window. It's like so factual that like I have to have students like look for wording. Like if they see in one sentence it says symmetrical and the next sentence it says asymmetrical, then they know it's a contrast.
Right.
So it's like tone is kind of tough. Like it's not really like on here as much as it used to be.
Yeah, there was one also there was a lot of like which transitions the sentence into the sentence, and there was one where I don't know, you probably have seen this just working with us, but I've never seen it intern. Have you ever seen intern as an answer?
You know, they're using different ones now.
Yeah.
I haven't seen intern from like the question bank, but they're throwing out things like specifically.
Right.
What else have I seen?
Hence. By contrast. That's more normal, but intern I've never seen intern
they're
before.
using a lot. Yeah, intern's a new one. Like I feel like
I actually don't know if that's supposed to go from positive to negative or what intern is.
I know, like, I feel like the biggest strategy that I've been using is like having the students try to put it in a sentence. Like, how would we use intern in a sentence? You know what? Comment below if you can think of a way you would use intern in a context. So give me 2 sentences with intern in the middle. How would it function? You know, because that's an interesting
Yeah,
one.
I saw that and I was like, I was like, maybe, but I don't think so.
Right, right.
I picked the like more obvious contrasting one for what I saw today.
So you've already answered this one. I wanted to ask you how are the last 5 to 10 questions on Math Module 2, and it sounds like it got hard and then got easier.
Yeah, and also, I don't know if this is like a typical structure, but the free response were scattered within the like last half of the Module 2, and then it went back to the multiple choice, and the last couple multiple choice were actually not very easy, but they were like definitely fair questions. I wasn't struggling that much. I jumped to question 15 when I got to that module, and I was like working through those ones, and I was like, it's actually not that bad. Yeah. And then I went back to do the earlier ones. I was like, oh, these ones are actually a little weird.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you know, and we can't talk about the specific questions because then College Board would shut my channel down, and we don't want that. So, but Emily and I did talk before this video, and she kind of filled me in on some of the stuff that was tested, and I am so relieved because I have to say it's everything I've been working on with my students. So, like, I would love to hear what you guys think that did take the test, if like you were surprised by any of the concepts, or like you basically saw what you've been studying and expected to see, because that was kind of nice to hear that. But let's talk about this geometry stuff. Because didn't you see like a geometry question that was like a little different than anything you've seen before? That you can't get into specifics.
I don't know how in depth I can get with this. But basically, I'm used to seeing, like, if there are 2 shapes involved in a problem, I'm used to like them asking about like area or angles within it. But this one gave you like a perimeter, which I don't think I've ever seen that before. And also you have to know what it means when like a line is tangent to a circle, and I think that's not necessarily the most familiar thing to a lot of students. So it was a very weird 2 shapes problem, and I was like, okay. And it wasn't even asking about properties of the shapes, it was asking about like a diagonal going through one of them. It was very weird.
Yeah, I feel like, and I said this to Emily already, what's separating the men from the boys, it's just a phrase, guys, please don't take that literally, but you know what I mean, is these geometry problems on Module 2, because College Board is able to change them up so much, where I feel like that's the category that's hardest to prep for. But at the same time, what I will say is like a common theme I've seen as of late on like the digital SAT materials is they often give a circle, and then you end up using a triangle inside the circle to figure something out. And a lot of the times it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared that you end up using. So just keep that in mind. It might look like a circle problem, but it's actually a triangle problem in disguise. So I just want you guys to be aware of that.
Another example of honestly the same concept in a different form was sometimes you get a circle question about the circle, like the standard equation, and obviously it ends with equals r squared, but on this test it didn't give you a point here and a point here and then this is the radius. It gave you the center and then a point down here,
like
and that involves
diagonally?
And so you would have to know, you'd have to like actually like on my scrap sheet I like just drew it out. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is a 3, 4, 5, so the radius was 5. But yeah, stuff like that.
Right, so. I know, and that's a big thing too, is using the scrap paper. I mean, how much do you think you used the scrap paper?
It was full. Like,
was it?
Full. Like, but I'm very much like I'm just thinking like kind of like do this while looking at the screen. So, and it wasn't organized at all. It was just like anywhere there was room, but I have to do that. I can't like, I don't know. I don't want to use the annotate tool.
I don't either.
Whatever.
How many pieces of paper did they give you?
1.
Okay.
But you could ask for more.
Did you ask for more?
I didn't. I had enough room, but
okay.
I don't know. It was just like weird because there's the little flag where you can mark stuff to come back to it, but I still like my gut instinct is to just write something down. So I had a list on the side of my paper of ones to go back to, even though I could have just looked at the little flag, but I'm just so like geared to like wanting to write stuff down.
Yeah.
Where I just feel like I have a better connection with my work if I write it down versus like just using the buttons. You know what I mean?
I like that. I like how you articulate that.
And I committed to memory a lot better too. Like I wrote little notes on the English ones I had to come back to, which again, there is a tool for that, but I don't know, like mind to hand connection for me is better.
I know, and I agree, and that's why like I'm telling everybody that I'm working with, use your scrap paper, even for the English, annotate on the scrap paper. It's just so much easier, and then everything's in one spot, and you have a system, because I think with taking a test, it's all about having a system down, and if you're like using the annotate tool for the English and then you're going to the scrap paper for the math, that's not a system, you know? So, but we got to talk about your organization on that scrap paper. I'm sure you were fine though. I mean,
my
you could
handwriting's
handle
chicken scratch too. So.
Mine too. Did you hide the clock or show the clock?
So obviously I've never taken the digital test in like a professional or like an official setting before. So I left it on just to see how I would feel. And then I realized like every 2 seconds I'm like, my eyes are like going like this. Like it was stressing me out. So I turned it off because I can work pretty fast anyways. So I would turn it off, get through a bunch, and then turn it back on just to see where I was at. But that way I wasn't constantly like seeing it in my peripheral, like stressing me out. But I would just like look at it occasionally, but
I feel like the same way. Like I feel like when the clock is up and it's ticking down, it puts me in a scarcity mindset, and like I feel like I'm like losing time because of the ticking down. Yeah. So I'm the same way, where I would rather just like look at it sporadically just to see where I'm at. Yeah. If you could go back in time and study one thing before taking this May test, what would it have been?
I would have studied all the concepts about like what makes two systems of equations have like one solution, no solutions, infinitely many solutions, and then also what to do if they give you constants as like letters in your systems of equations rather than numbers. Definitely. Oh, and standard deviation, because I always forget the rules of standard deviation. There was one.
Yes, standard deviation. More spread out. Higher or lower standard deviation? Higher, yep. It deviates more. So if the data is more spread out, it's higher. Don't forget that.
Work that out, but I still had to like, I wish it was just like, oh, I know it's this one, but I had to like sit there and I was like thinking about it.
I know, it's almost counterintuitive. I feel like a lot of students pick the opposite, you know? So a big complaint on the digital SAT is like the emphasis on vocabulary, and let's be honest, like, and you might feel the same way out there, let us know if you do, like, people's vocabulary be weak, right? Like you might need some work in that area. I know most people do. I could still improve in that area. How do you think the vocabulary was on this test?
Well, there was nothing where the multiple choice had vocabulary that was very hard, but it was knowing the vocabulary that they used in their passages that made answering the questions a lot easier. So, for example, I'm in AP Biology right now, and there was a question at like a passage about alleles and like heterozygous whatever, and seeing that vocabulary, I'm familiar with it right now, so it didn't stress me out. But if I was a student who hadn't like taken AP Lang or I hadn't taken AP Bio, seeing all this like stuff, I would have been like, oh my god, I don't know what's going on. Like it would just, the extra science information might have scared me and might have freaked me out. But being in classes like AP Lang where you're forced to read a lot, or AP Bio where you just are like used to these kind of passages, it wasn't actually bad at all. But I would say if you don't read a lot, or if you're not in advanced English classes, the passages might have been a lot more confusing. And you might not have understood how to end the paragraphs if you like weren't understanding what was going on within the actual reading.
Yeah, and I think that this brings up a good point, because I think everybody like considers vocabulary the words and context questions that you see at the beginning, but what Emily's saying is vocabulary is throughout the whole English parts, even the reading parts. And so like one tip that I have for you guys is when you're prepping for the SAT and you're like working through a module or something, or even through the question bank, I don't care what kind of question you're on. It doesn't need to be a words and context question. Anytime you see a word you don't know, write it down. Have a list. Like, list of words I don't know. Look up the definition and then study that, because like the science words tend to recycle and come up again. You know, the other words that we see on the SAT tend to come up over and over again. I can't tell you how many times I've seen the word innocuous now. Yeah. You know what I mean? So definitely like keep a running list and a running tab of the words that you encounter.
And as far as words in context, there was almost none, which
that surprised me so much.
Which I was like, hello, like where are they?
I know, because
it's really weird.
Usually, like I feel like on the practice test, there's like 5 at the beginning of each module. There wasn't that many.
No, it was just different tenses of words like will, would, like would.
Oh,
have.
So like more subject verb agreement questions.
It was very little words in context.
So interesting.
I'm trying to think if there was any. I mean, I might have, obviously it was like the first part of the exam, so maybe I just like
kind of a blur.
blacked out, but I don't think that there was any.
Yeah.
Which was weird, so.
Well, I mean, if any of you guys disagree or if you felt the vocabulary was really hard, let us know. Like, comment below. I'd love to hear, you know, what your thoughts were on that for sure. Last question.
Okay.
So, what is your biggest advice to any students out there that are planning to take the digital SAT this year?
I would say do as much reading as possible, because in all of the reading passages, they're going to try and scare you by listing some company or organization or like cultural term that you've never seen before in this like huge word, and that's just distracting you from what that passage is talking about. So if you get comfortable reading all kinds of different texts, like science, fiction, nonfiction, whatever, if you get comfortable seeing all these kinds of different passages with like College Board trying to scare you away with these big words, you'll find it a lot easier to answer the questions. And then also get comfortable using all the tools on Bluebook, because if you go into the test and this is the first time you're using all the tools, it's another thing, another time waster just thinking about how to access everything. But if you're very comfortable already, it will be a lot easier.
Great suggestions. All right, guys, that's it for this video today. I hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you so much, Emily, for being here and all your insights. And until next time, guys, happy prepping.